Hello guys, today we will be talking about What If Naruto Was Called as the Shield Hero Part 5 Finale. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe. Now let's begin. Naruto and the party returned to Erhard's shop and collected their new equipment. The group said goodbye to Jiraiya and headed out of the city. In a couple hours they came upon damaged village of Loot. They took a couple of room in the inn and talked with the head of the village. Village head, I'm glad to see you and your party, Shield Hero. Naruto smiled and replied, we wanted to check on your village and give you your portion of the money from the spoils of the wave to help rebuild. He pulled out a scroll and unrolled it. A bag appeared and he handed it to the village elder. The elder bowed and said, this is too gracious, Shield Hero. The spoils are yours and your party's. Naruto shook his head and replied, nonsense, we feel that you guys need all the help you can get to rebuild. We will be splitting up to help you guys rebuild. Half of my group will help with the rebuilding while the other half is working on leveling. The elderly man bowed and said, I don't know how we can ever repay you for your generosity. Naruto took a thinking pose and replied, I would like for Loot to be my hub for a trading company that I want to form. The man looked surprised and set down the coin bag on his desk and began to fish around in his desk and pockets. He finally came up with an item and explained, this is a token that is a bill of passage that allows you to not have to pay business taxes put upon by the local lords. It should help you in your endeavors as merchant. Naruto shook the man's hand and said, thank you. We really appreciate it. We will be around for about a week, then we will be heading north to another country. The elder nodded and said, good luck and enjoy our town. We do appreciate the help from you and your party. Naruto left the office and headed back to the inn. He then sat on the bed Senza style with an incubator in each hand. The girls found him that way several hours later. Millie asked, Naruto, would you like to get cleaned up with us? Naruto opened his eyes and replied, sure, why not? He put on a shirt and followed the girls out with the incubators in hand. They arrived at the bathhouse and quickly stripped. Naruto by now was desensitized to seeing the girls in the nude and the girls seeing him the same. He set the eggs aside and the group began to clean each other. After washing off the soap they got into the tub. Sylvie and Rafklia sat at his side while Millie and Reno were either side of the other girls. The talk covered the day and wondering what would hatch out of the eggs. After drying off and changing clothes the group headed back to the inn. They began to study the books and most quickly fell asleep. Naruto was awake before the others and noticed the eggs cracking. Naruto exclaimed, girls! Girls! The eggs! Rafklia replied groggily, what? Sylvie said, my pillow is missing. Millie sat up and slipped over to Naruto's side. Not noticing that she only wore a pair of panties. She grabbed Naruto's arm and held close to him. He felt her breasts and looked down to see them and sighed. He shook his head and watched as the shells broke open at the same time. A pink chick with a yellow beak. It began to squawk, pee, pee, pee. The small bird jumped upon Naruto's head. The other held a lizard-like creature with wings. It was white with red streaks, and red membranes for wings. The lizard's blue eyes fluttered open and it jumped onto Naruto's shoulder. It looked at the bird and the bird looked back. Naruto did his best to look between them and sighs. The lizard then rubs its head against Naruto's cheek. The bird then flaps its wings and begins to squawk. Naruto looks at Millie and asks, so I got a dragon and what? Millie replied, it looks like you have a dragon and a Fallolial. I'm not sure, but I'm sure that they will need to be fed. Naruto then said with a chuckle, I would get a shirt on, since they are not going to be looking for milk. Millie blushed and then made a neep sound. She then ran to her pack and put on a shirt. Naruto waited for the other girls to wake and see his new monsters. Naruto fed the shells to his shield. He got to Animal Tamer Shield series. The group then dressed and headed down to the tavern in the inn. Naruto ordered food for the group and the newly hatched animals. Millie and Reno stayed in town to help with the rebuilding, while Naruto, Sylvie, Rafklia and the monsters headed out of town. Naruto noticed the animals were growing at an exponential rate. By the time they had come back from training, hunting the pair of animals were now at his waist. He had also had to chide both of them for aggression towards each other several times. It did appear that they did listen to him, but there seemed to be a deep anger between the two of them. He also found that the Filolio liked to run while the dragon liked to fly instead of run, but the flight was limited. There was limited fighting with other animals for the two to take out their aggression. The two seemed to want to please Naruto as their parent, so they would at least get along for the most part. When they got back into the town, he fed them some of the chimera meat and this caused them to grow even more. By that night they were up to his chest in height. At this point they were level 3. That night Naruto left a clone with the animals and gave them their names. Raphtalia chided Naruto for not being too creative for the Filolio, in that he named it Philo, but the bird liked its name. The dragon was named Ryoko, which it seemed to like. They also found out that the dragon was a wire-type dragon. This was a real find. Most dragons were Tyrella-type dragons, but Ryoko was a mix of Pura Blood and Tyrella. Also, another attribute was that they were the most loyal type of dragons around. The clone kept watch on Philo and Ryoko. Both seemed happy with the clone and went to sleep in the stalls. The group headed to the baths again that night. The subject of the discussion was Philo and Ryoko. The group went to bed and woke up the next day to find Millie in bed with the usual trio. She wasn't wearing anything. Naruto, being the first to wake, found the weight of Millie on him. He reached down and found out that she was without clothes. He whispered into her ear, "Millie-chan, why are you naked?" She sleepily replied, "My hero Naruto." Naruto chuckled and said, "We have another rabbit." Raphtalia sighed and opened eyes. "Already? I thought it would be me. I just hope that the others that are going to join yous aren't going to pull this." Naruto chuckled and said, "I can make a clone for each of you." Raphtalia glared at him and said, "That isn't the point. Bunny's first wife. I'm second wife. I've staked my claim. Looks like Millie is working on third." Naruto sighed and asked, "Why couldn't I get this type of attention when I was in my world?" Raphtalia laid on her side and replied, "Would you have known how to deal with it?" Naruto looked her in the eyes and replied, "No, not really. I guess I'm starting to figure out what Tom was going through." Raphtalia replied, "Maybe, maybe not. Ours is more tailored to you and what we do know about you from working with you and getting to know you, rather than idolizing you from afar and knowing nothing about you." Naruto nodded and said, "You do have a point. Each of you has a reason to like me and follow me." Raphtalia nodded and said, "Yes, at first it was more than likely a hero complex or more like you saving us, but now it is more. We've grown with you." Naruto chuckled and said, "Literally. Going from around 10 to 18 with me." Raphtalia replied, "I'm glad you didn't treat us like daughters." Naruto asked, "Why would I do that? You may be chronologically be 10 or so, but you have physically grown to 18 and mentally you are more than likely at the same level as me. We will let Arusanin decide if you guys are old enough mentally to make the decision." Millie sat up and stretched out, thus showing Naruto her whole front. Raphtalia commented, "Well, that leaves nothing to the imagination." Millie looked confused and looked down. She noticed no top and sitting on top of Naruto. She blushed bright red. She stuttered out, "I'm sorry, master. I am yours anyways to do with as you see fit. If you want to take me now, you can." Naruto shioused his eyes and shook his head. He then said, "That won't be necessary. Is there a reason that you came over here naked?" Millie nodded and replied meekly, "You're warm. I also like you." Naruto smiled and said, "Well, next time keep some clothes on and you can come over and sleep with us. Like I've said before, we don't need any unexpected pregnancies. It might be fun, but we're not ready for that yet." She bowed her head and said, "Yes, Master Naruto." He lifted her chin and said, "I do appreciate the gesture. Now we need to continue to work on the town, leveling and our new recruits, Philo and Ryoko." The group nodded and all of them got dressed and entered the stables. They found the clone snuggled on one side by a large white, pink Filolio and on the other by a white dragon with red wings and red spinal barbs, both with blue eyes. The girls said as one, "Ah." This disturbed the monsters and the clone. The clone sat up and asked, "So, boss, What are they going to do today? Naruto replied, first is breakfast, then we are going to have some training for each of them. The clone nodded and said, now you two need to listen to the boss. Both of the creatures seemed to be happy and made a happy squawk and growl. They turned to Naruto and the clone disappeared. He guided them to the chimera carcass, which they began to devour. The girls watched in morbid fascination. A clone then brought out several scrolls. He handed them to each member and disappeared. Everyone except for Rino was able to get their breakfast out of the scroll. Naruto helped her and they all ate. Afterwards Raphlia and Millie stayed in the village while Naruto, Sylvie, Rino, Philo and Ryoko went into the woods. After taking out some of the local monsters, Philo basically laid down. Ryoko pushed Naruto to Philo. Naruto then mounted Philo like he was about to ride a horse. Philo squawked in glee and began to run. Naruto easily grabbed on the feathers at the base of her neck and allowed her to take him for a ride. Sylvie was about to try to catch them but Ryoko got in front of her and shook its head. Sylvie just patted the dragon's head. The dragon began to purr and close its eyes. Sylvie sighed and said, well, while they're gone, why don't we continue to train? Sylvie, Rino and Ryoko continued to clear the area of monsters. A couple out. Naruto didn't seem the least bit disturbed. At first Ryoko didn't gain any altitude, but after a few minutes it began to climb. This continued for about a half hour, as the dragon took its master on a meandering tour of the sky. The landing was kind of scary for the girls until Naruto jumped off of Ryoko and ran beside the dragon. He exclaimed, you can do it, Ryoko. Slow yourself and then put your legs down and begin to run. I'll be right beside you. The girls were impressed by his speed. They couldn't even go that fast using chakra. Ryoko began to falter and Naruto was right there and used his body to help steady the dragon. This didn't stop the dragon from crash landing on top of Naruto. The girls and Philo came over to the crater and heard laughter coming from the crater. Naruto stood up and was petting Ryoko. He said, you did good. You just need to bleed more of your speed off. Fairly fast. We might just be able to make it to. The dragon looked upset and concerned at Naruto. It growled and made calls at Naruto. He replied, I'm fine. I'm more worried about you. I'm built rather tough. The dragon was rubbing its head against Naruto with a worried look on its face. If you could say that a dragon could have a worried look. He continued to laugh and hugged the dragon. He then began to inspect the dragon for injuries. He then said, level 7 for both of them. I think that we're doing pretty good. He pointed his hand at the dragon and said, fast heal. The dragon was surrounded in yellow light and the scratches and the slight tear on the wing disappeared. The dragon nuzzled Naruto and to his surprise Philo nuzzled the dragon. Rino looked in confusion and said, that is unusual. Philolials and dragons usually have a primal hatred. It looks like you've overcome that, master. Naruto smiled and petted Philo and Ryoko. He then said, time to head back to the village. It's getting late. Naruto looks at the party stats. Naruto evil, 31, Jiraiya evil, 34, Sylvie evil, 38, Raphlia evil, 38, Millie evil, 36, Rino evil, 34, Philo evil, 7, Ryoko evil, 7. He looked at his shields and looked to see if there were any that he hadn't mastered. Only those that he hadn't hit the level requirements for. He noticed that he had opened both the Philolial and dragon trees, but both were still locked. He had used a feather and a scale to do this. He had used the eggshells to get the Demon Tamer Shield and Dragon Tamer Shield, respectively. Both were now at their 3rd tier. Naruto again left a clone with Philo and Ryoko. The rest of the party relaxed in the inn and went to sleep. Naruto woke to find Millie on top of him again, but this time she at least was wearing a nightie and panties. He also felt Sylvie's hand in his pants. He sighed and wondered when he was really going to lose his virginity and to which of the girls. He also figured that the rest would soon follow to not be left out. He sighed heavily. You don't mind, do you? He heard Sylvie ask quietly. Naruto replied, that is sort of like cheating. Sylvie smirked and said, you might be right, but I am a rabbit after all. Both began to chuckle lightly. Millie began to stir and said, "Your hand isn't as good as what it's holding." Naruto sighed and said, "What am I going to do with you girls?" Sylvie replied, "Give us little babies." She extracted her hand and slid out of the bed. He watched as she took off her nightshirt to reveal that she was wearing nothing else. She then bent over and began to dress. Naruto watched the show inside. Millie said, "You are the owner of her and you can either bet her or tell her not to do that." Raphtalia then spoke up, "He is a teenager like us and likes the view and the attention. I'm sure that our first night with him will be exquisite." Naruto replied, "I have no clue other than the mechanics. The first would be just that. My first. I would do what I can to make sure that you're happy, but I'm not sure what to do." Rino groaned and said, "You guys are making me horny." Naruto apologized, "I'm sorry." Rino shook her head and said, "Don't worry. After what you've done for me, I'm set for being your fourth wife no matter what. You're too good to worry otherwise." Naruto just looked at Rino and sighed. He then said in a resigned tone, "Not you too." Rino winked at Naruto and said, "Of course, master. We all love our master and want to marry him. He is so selfless." Naruto shook his head and the group laughed at his red face. They went down and got breakfast. After breakfast the group went out to see Philo and Ryoko. One of the villagers exclaimed, "What are the knights doing here?" Naruto and the girls took Philo and Ryoko out to see the commotion. Naruto sighed to see Mine holding a scroll and beginning to read, "By royal decree this territory will be given to the spear hero for his work in the wave. The first order of business will be a toll for entering and leaving of 50 silver." There were murmurs of dissent. Finally, a villager exclaimed, "Hey, that isn't fair." Mine raised her head and replied, "You have no right to object." Naruto chuckled and exclaimed, "Hey Motoyasu. Do you know how much it cost to stay in the inn?" Motoyasu seemed to have no clue. So, Naruto informed him, "It costs 1 silver per night to stay at the inn and that includes food. You're asking for them to pay for almost 2 months' stay at the inn just for ingress and egress from the village. Per day. That will bankrupt the village and I don't care if you say it is for the rebuilding fund. It will not make it there. It will dissuade people from coming to village and cause people who live here to leave. You will rule over a ghost territory." Mine replied angrily, "What do you know? Leave now, criminal." Villagers became angry and proclaimed their anger at the new tax on their village. Mine smiled evilly and proclaimed, "You are going against your rightful ruler. Guards." Naruto exclaimed, "Enough, I wouldn't fight them. I would just pack up and leave." Suddenly a group of masked women appeared in front of Mine. Naruto smirked and the lead woman asked, "I think you know whom we represent?" She then handed Mine a red scroll. Mine read the scroll and growled. She then exclaimed, "Shield Hero. We want to fight you for the rights for this village." Naruto raised an eyebrow. He then asked, "Why?" Mine was shaking with anger and exclaimed, "It doesn't matter. Just fight us for the village." Naruto shrugged and the village leader asked, "Please, Shield Hero. We'll do anything." Naruto sighed and looked at Philo who was growling at the dragon that Motoyasu had rode in on. Naruto looked at Motoyasu and asked, "Are you sure? This will be twice I've beaten you." Motoyasu laughed and said, "You really think you can beat me with this laughable bird?" Naruto warned, "I would watch what you say. This bird might not take insults too kindly." Motoyasu again laughed and said, "This stupid bird couldn't do anything." As he rounded behind Philo, Philo kicked him, sending him flying over 3 meters into a hay pile. Mine chided Naruto and said, "That was low." Naruto replied, "He was warned." Mine looked down at Motoyasu and exclaimed, "Someone, healing magic. Quickly." Naruto sighed and said in an exasperated tone, "Fine, a race will do just fine." The dragon seemed dismissive of Philo, but growled at Ryoko, who growled back at Motoyasu's dragon. Several minutes later Naruto sat mounted on Philo and Motoyasu was mounted on his dragon. Ryoko was being held by Sylvie, but was still growling at the other dragon. The leader of the village was standing in front of the 4 contestants and said, "The contest is 3 laps around the village. Go." Naruto and Philo easily took the lead. As they rounded the first corner, Naruto noticed the anger in Mine's face. He sighed when he saw her nod to a guard close to her. He didn't see anything else. As he rounded the corner, he reached out and felt those around him and began to sense magic forming in front of him. He exclaimed, "Philo, be ready to jump." Both saw a hole form in front of them, as they were rounding the last corner. Without an order, Philo jumped the hole and had to take a wide turn. This wasn't a problem, since they had nearly a half-lap lead. This cost them almost an eighth lap of their lead. He stuck his tongue out at Mine, who threw a fireball at the pair. Naruto quickly brought his shield up and blocked the fireball. This surprised all of those watching. The first princess was interfering in the race. Naruto chuckled and said, "That is wise. I'm going to make sure that you pay for this, Malty." Mine growled and exclaimed, "Damn, devil of the shield." Naruto missed the hole on the next corner and Philo tripped in it. Naruto looked around and glared at the knight. He then said, "Revenge will be mine. You will be shown for what you are to the whole city when I return." He turned to Philo and exclaimed, "Fast heal." He then mounted Philo and the pest spell against me, and that includes your bitch of a cocksleeve. Motoyasu looked confused and asked, "What are you talking about? This has been a fair race." Naruto replied angrily, "Bullshit. A new hole at turn 4 and again in turn 1 on our second lap. A fireball. Now a slow spell on me and speed spell on you. I would say that is cheating." Motoyasu laughed as he passed Naruto and exclaimed, "You just can't stand to lose." The dragon slapped its tail against Philo's face and knocked her off course. Motoyasu laughed and said, "Take that." Naruto steered Philo back to the course and said, "Here we go again. Get him, clone." "Philo, jump." Philo jumped yet a new hole on the fourth corner. She had almost caught Motoyasu. Naruto began to smile as he heard Motoyasu exclaim, "What the hell?" Naruto smiled as he was just behind Motoyasu and saw that the knight that was on the corner was now hanging from a tree, missing his armor, and tied up. Naruto began to laugh as they passed the second comer and Philo passed the dragon on the outside easily, and they found yet another knight in the same predicament. As they rounded the third corner, Naruto and Philo pulled clearly ahead. Naruto shifted Philo to the left, as he heard Motoyasu exclaim, "Chaos Spear." This left the course spot marked, but missed Naruto and Philo. Naruto laughed as they approached the last corner and yet another knight was strung up. Naruto and Philo crossed the finish line more than a minute ahead of Motoyasu. Mine growled and waited for Motoyasu to finish the course. She then said, "There is no way that criminal and his foul could win. He cheated." Naruto laughed and replied, "Nah, Philo was a good Philolio." Several women in cloaks and masks appeared and said, "Sir Uzumaki didn't cheat. He didn't use any magic other than a healing spell. We did find spells that came from the Spear Heroes party. Do you wish to argue this, princess?" Malty gritted her teeth and replied, "No." Naruto patted Philo and she suddenly was covered in smoke and changed size into a larger version of herself. This time she looked more like an owl than an ostrich. Ryoko came over and actually nuzzled Philo and was also surrounded by smoke. She also became larger. Both exclaimed into the air in joy. Naruto shook his head in exasperation at the two. Motoyasu asked, "What is that?" Naruto patted the red and white dragon and replied, "This is Ryoko. She is my dragon. I would advise you keep on both of their good sides." Both Philo and Ryoko growled at Motoyasu. He backed up at the look of both animals' anger at him. He was surprised that both a dragon and a Philolio were getting along so well together. He then said, "I will get you someday." Naruto replied, "Do you hear yourself? You sound like a villain." Millie nodded her head and said, "He actually does." Motoyasu hadn't listened to Naruto and his group was heading away when he had said his piece. If he had listened and actually thought about what Naruto had said, he might have agreed with him and started to change his way, but it wasn't in his cards for today. Naruto looked at the village leader and asked, "So what now?" The leader said, "We don't know how to repay you. Since you paid us with the spoils of the wave and have been helping us with rebuilding. Now you've kept us from being ruled by a bad lord. What can we do to repay you?" Philo nodded to a rickety wagon. Naruto asked, "What about that wagon?" The chief asked. "Is that all? We would certainly give you more." Naruto shook his head and replied, "We don't really have a need. The wagon will be enough." The chief bowed and said, "You really are generous. We will make the wagon ready for you." Naruto bowed and said, "Thank you, and we do have to leave soon." The chief nodded and said, "We are thankful for all the help that you've given us. It should be ready by tomorrow morning. Rest easy, my good hero." Naruto smiled and said, "Just call me Naruto." The chief nodded and said, "As you wish, Naruto-sama." Naruto sighed and said, "Do as you wish." Not wanting to fight it. That night was a celebration for both the party and the town. Success seems to be connected with action. Successful people keep moving. They make mistakes but they don't quit. Conrad Hilton Naruto and the girls woke up early the next day from the festival. He visited Philo, Ryoko and his clone. The group loaded up the new cart and bid the town goodbye. The whole town of Lute was there to say goodbye to the party. Ryoko had Raphlia on its back and the rest rode in the carts. They were making good time and found a man who was running down the pathway at almost a full run. Naruto asked, "Where are you going in such a hurry?" The man stopped and looked at Naruto pleadingly. He asked, "Please get me to the next town as quickly as possible. I need to get this medicine to my ailing mother." Naruto shrugged and turned to Sylvie and said, "Meet us at the village gates." Sylvie nodded and Naruto jumped up on top of the cart's roof. Making sure not to stand on the cloth only, he waved at Ryoko, who swooped down towards him. Naruto reached down and pulled the man up with him and jumped when Ryoko came close. He landed with the man on Ryoko's back gently behind Raphlia. Raphlia asked, "Where to?" Naruto replied, "The village over the ridge." Raphlia and Naruto seemed fine while the man seemed a little shaken by the ride on the dragon. It didn't take much time to go over the ridge and come up upon the town. Naruto pulled out his token and threw it gently at the guard and said, "I want that back when I come back." The guard fumbled the token, but finally caught it, but dropped his spear in the attempt. He finally understood the comment from the man on the flying small dragon. Ryoko landed and was panting outside a cabin with Raphlia stroking it gently. She was saying, "You did great." Naruto entered the cabin with the man and saw a woman in the bed. He extended his hand and said, "I'll administer the potion. Get some water boiled." The man walked into the other room. A green glow covered Naruto's hand and he ran it down the woman's body. He shook his head. He opened the potion and it glowed. He helped the woman to a sitting position and helped her to drink the potion. She glowed and life seemed to return to the woman. Naruto smiled and whispered, "Take more care when you push out your power. Don't use it all at once, or at least find me afterwards. I can heal the damage. You hurt the pathways in your body." The woman looked at him and asked, "How do you know about Henjin Muso style?" Naruto shook his head and replied, "I am a shinobi, a doctor, among other things. I can tell what has happened to a body. Now let me examine you again." His hand glowed green and he moved. He then said, "You are now healed. You are in better shape than I, the leader of my village. She is like a mother to me, but she is 50, but hides her age and looks like she is in her 20s. The woman laughs heartily and says, "I wouldn't worry about a woman's ego. She more than likely has other issues to deal with and thus want to hide this part of herself. I'm glad she treats you well as a mother figure." Naruto blushes, but the man comes in from the other room and exclaims, "Mother, you're better." She grins and makes a muscle. She then exclaims, "Because of the sensei here, I'm ready to take on a dragon." Naruto shook his head and replied, "I would advise you to rest for another day or so before beginning regular exercise." The woman bowed and said, "As you order, sensei." The man asked, "What is the cost?" Naruto replied, "I saw something different and learned something different, so no charge." The woman shook her head and said, "That won't do. If you come back through this village, I will teach you or one of your companions something. Shield hero." She whispered the last part. Naruto didn't show his surprise, but replied happily, "Thank you, I will. Both of you will be well and be safe during the waves." The woman and man both replied, "We will and thank you, sensei." Ryoko perked up as Naruto exited the building. Raftlia asked, "How did it go?" Naruto replied, "I think we made an ally in this village." Raftlia asked, "What makes you so sure?" Naruto smiled as they mounted Ryoko, "Trust me." Raftlia replied, "Of course, since you figured out that it would be better for me to ride Ryoko than to ride in the wagon." The trio headed to the gate. Ryoko landed outside the gate and Naruto put his hand out. The guard handed back the token. Naruto said, "Thanks. Is there a road around the village, since we need to actually head more to the north and not stop in the village?" The guard pointed to the trail that led to the east around the village and replied, "That will lead you around the village. It connects to the road on the other side of the village. It is quicker than going through town." Naruto flipped the guard 5 copper coins and said, "Thanks. Time to head out, everyone." He left the guard stunned holding the copper coins. Naruto mounted the carriage. The dragon took off while the carriage took off to the east. They were able to make it several leagues before nightfall. Naruto began to prepare the meal while Millie and Raftlia gathered water for the group and the monsters. After dinner Naruto sat on a stump and began to read one of the magic books that they had purchased. He noticed Philo and Ryoko move up to him and cuddle up to him. He put the book down and began to pet the animals' heads. He did this for about 20 minutes with a smile on his face. He was glad that they had learned to get along even though Philolials and dragons seemed to have a history of not liking each other. Suddenly both were covered in smoke and he had 2 children laying on his lap. What really surprised him was that they were naked and had wings. Philo had white, angelic wings, while Ryoko bat-like wings had white arm portion. The membrane was a light red. He surmised that the girls were about 10 or so in age from their figures. Having seen the girls in his party at that age, he touched a seal on his wrist and 2 blankets came out. He set them on the girls as best as he could. He then said, "I'm either going to have to find some clothes that transform with them or teach them how to transform, so that they have clothes." Sylvie woke and looked over at Naruto and his new admirers. She asked, "Who are they?" Naruto replied, "The blonde is Philo and the white-haired is Ryoko. They are also girls. We will need to work on teaching them how to transform with clothes or at least some modesty. I figure that with their age it might be a little hard." Ryoko opens her eyes sleepily and says, "Thank you, master." Naruto smiled and rubbed her head. He replies, "Anytime." Sylvie walks over to Naruto and rolls up Philo in the blanket and puts her closer to the fire. Philo lets out a mild whine. Sylvie giggles and says, "You just can't get away from having more girls. So, are they going to be daughters or more lovers?" Naruto gently rolls Ryoko in the blanket and places her near Philo. He and Sylvie sit in between the pair of shape-changing monsters. Naruto replied after a minute, "I think I have enough possible lovers. Heck, we're heading to get Raftlia's friend, Rafana. I also have a feeling that Keel is also a girl for all the things that point to boyhood." Sylvie giggled and replied, "You may be right on both. How are you going to train them on chakra?" Naruto looked down at Ryoko and replied, "The same as I did you guys." Sylvie then said, "So we do it in the morning?" Naruto shook his head and replied, "No, we need a place where they can rest after starting their chakra. So, after we hit the border. It shouldn't take more than a few more days to hit the border." Sylvie then asked, "Siltvult?" Naruto nodded and replied, "Siltvult." Naruto woke Raftlia for the next shift for guarding and informed her about how Philo and Ryoko could transform. The next shift was Sylvie and she woke Naruto for breakfast. He began to fix breakfast and had to say loudly, "Philo, Ryoko, keep the blankets wrapped around you while in human form for now. I don't want any strangers to see your wings or your bodies." Both girls smiled and replied happily, "Okay." They sat by the campfire and watched Naruto making breakfast. As he was dishing out breakfast he explained, "For you who don't know, Philo and Ryoko went through yet another transformation. It appears that they have a human transformation. We need to support them in that they don't understand modesty as girls and that we don't have any clothes for them right now. It will be a week before I can train them in chakra or even activate their chakra. So, if they transform, We need them to get in the wagon as soon as possible. We will buy them some dresses or something they like when we get to the next town. It should be in the border town. Philo, Ryoko, I want to make sure that you understand that you need to remove the clothes before you transform back to your dragon or philolial forms. After breakfast we will head out. Raphleia, how is riding Ryoko instead of the wagon? Raphleia replied, I don't seem to be getting an upset stomach. Thank you, Naruto-sama. Naruto nodded and looked at Ryoko. Naruto said, I want you and Raphleia to be the warning for us about bandits or trouble ahead of the cart. Do you understand? Ryoko nodded and replied, yes master. Naruto smiled and rubbed her white hair. Philo puffed her cheeks at the attention. Naruto knelt down to Philo and said, Philo, I need you to keep the cart going at a good clip, but let me know if you get tired. I want to make sure that you're healthy. I'm counting on you. He rubbed her head and this seemed to calm the girl. Naruto then said, alright, time to head out. The girls dropped the blankets and transformed. Naruto sighed and picked up the blankets. He sealed them away. While Raphleia led Ryoko away from the fire and Millie led Philo to the cart. Naruto, Sylvie and Reno cleaned up the campsite and loaded the cart. When they finished, they headed north. Just before they entered the town, they were met by a group of 3 cloaked youngsters, and 2 adults. The youngsters entered the cart and the older pair were at the front of the cart. Naruto asked, so, how has your recovery been? A female voice answered, very well, thank you. Van Ricknot has been very accommodating. I again thank you for the rescue. The queen will also thank you for the rescue. Naruto smiled and said, it was my pleasure. You didn't deserve to be locked up. I'll be back in a couple weeks at most. I just need to get a couple more hourglasses on my shield. The female bowed and said, we need to head back and I hope the children will help you out. Keep them safe. I was able to get them up to level 10. I put them under your care. I know one does fancy you. Naruto rolled his eyes and replied with mirth, I know. We shall see how that goes. She will have to work it out with Sylvie here. Safe travels. Keep her safe. A voice that sounded just like Naruto's replied, you got it boss. With that the pair headed to the west. Raphleia and Ryoko landed right beside the cart and the group made their way to the entrance to the town. Naruto was surprised that there wasn't a guard waiting to charge entrance, but he wasn't complaining. They entered the market square and he sent Reno to pick out dresses for Philo and Ryoko. He picked an out-of-the-way location and parked the wagon. He then had Philo and Ryoko transform and get into the cart. Reno soon returned with several dresses. Naruto was happy about this. He then said, good job Reno. Now girls get dressed. Fold your wing, but you don't need to hide them. Stay close to me. The girls put on a dress that appealed to them and then got out of the wagon. Naruto then grabbed the wagon yoke and began to pull the wagon to a stall. The group then set up the goods to sell. After a few hours of sales, they had made some money. On an overlooking balcony a masked archer slumped down and was flanked by a pair of shadowy figures. A feminine voice said, I dare say that you didn't give her much of a chance to target anyone of the party at all. I dare say. The masculine replied, I'm a shinobi and my job is to protect the boss and make sure that he makes it to the other countries and get a meeting with the queen. I'm not sure if we will make it by the time of the next wave though. The female giggled and replied, I dare say. That isn't a problem. The queen has met you and it is a close approximation of meeting the hero. The masculine looked up and the purple eyes glowed. He then said, in a way yes and in a way no. I am a portion of his personality, but I have been reinforced by a power you don't understand and that is dangerous. I should report in and bring a new one to replace myself to you. They should be the one that you take to the queen. The female bowed and nodded. She began to go through the equipment of the downed assassin. While the male jumped off, Naruto looked up and said, girls, I'm leaving Raphleia and Reno in charge. Close up shop and head to the local inn. We will be crossing the border in the morning. Sylvie, you're with me. Sylvie nodded. Philo grabbed Naruto's hand and whined, but, master, I want to go with you. Naruto rubbed her head and said, there is something I need to do. Sylvie needs to help me. Please help the others clean up and I'll make sure that I buy some good food. Philo became excited and asked, you mean it? Naruto smiled and replied, you know it. Now go help the rest clean up. Philo ran off with a smile while exclaiming, all right. Sylvie giggled and said, you know how to deal with children. You will be a good father. Naruto got a faraway look in his eyes. He then said, I was a troubled child and met a few growing up. I try to help them not make the mistakes I made. Hopefully, I don't make the mistakes that were made with me. Sylvie took his arm and pulled him close. She then guided him down the street. She said quietly, you will make your own mistakes, but I'm sure that you will make sure that they have a minimum impact on your children. Naruto patted her hand on his arm and said, I hope you're right. The pair headed down the street, but suddenly took an alleyway with such speed that to most people they just disappeared. In the alley they met a cloaked figure. Naruto raised an eyebrow and asked, you're different. The cloaked figure pulled back the cowl and revealed a clone, but this clone had purple eyes, messier hair, and darker whisker marks. The clone replied, I know, but I'm not sure how. I should have dispelled more than a week ago. It's almost like I'm creating my own chakra. Naruto took a thinking pose and then said, I've gotten all of the information that you've sent from the dispelled clones you've made. I would like to do an experiment. You have appeared on the party list as Clone 9. If I'm right you might be a unique being, if not this might dispel you. Are you game? The clone nodded and replied, you know it. I'm a portion of your personality. I get the information when your clones dispel. So, whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. Naruto nodded and said, Sylvie, I want you to cut the clone's hand deeply. Sylvie looked at Naruto in confusion, but pulled out her sword and drew it across the clone's hand. They watched the clone's hit points drop, but he didn't disappear. They looked down at the clone's hand and blood was flowing out of the wound. Naruto did several hand seals and his right hand turned green. He ran it over the clone's bleeding hand. A look of shock came over him. He then did a couple more seals and the wound began to seal very quickly. He repeated the first set of hand seals and passed them over the clone and then declared, you are not a clone. You are an actual living being. I think that after being alive long enough and having Kyuubi chakra in you, you have attained living status. You will need to eat and keep in shape. You will need to select a name for yourself and you will be my envoy to the queen. The clone had a look of surprise and then said, I guess Menma will work. They both saw the change on their display. Menma saw as Naruto nodded to him and asked, what do you want me to do? Naruto replied, you are my eyes and ears besides Irusenin. We will use both clone and scroll communication. I will consider you my brother and you don't have to call me boss. Menma became teary-eyed and asked, what do we do about the shadows? Naruto smiled and replied, you are their consultant. You can deal with them however you like. Menma blushed and asked, what about girls? Naruto chuckled, if you find one you like, I will not stop you. I dare say. Then we do have a connection to the queen. If he wants experience I can give it to him, the female shadow said in a sultry voice. Naruto stepped forward, but Sylvie said in an authoritative voice, you hurt him and you will have to answer to us. The woman pulled back her cowl and let down her mask. Naruto and Sylvie recognized her from the king's court. She was one of the women that had handed out the rewards. She smirked and said, given the abilities of Menma and Naruto, I am interested in them, but with so many after Naruto I would prefer the one who is not taken. My job gets lonely and he is more than skilled to be a fellow shadow and someone with whom I share my life with. It is rare that a shadow can share our lives with someone. I'm sure that the queen will allow this. I dare say. Naruto looked at Menma who just shrugged. Naruto then said, I'm not opposed to it, but we are not going to be obligated to this country. The shadow nodded and replied, I dare say that I agree. Back at the cart Raphlia, Rafana, and Keel were all talking together. Keel exclaimed, yeah, Lord Van Ricknot has been great. We've learned so much in his lands. Rafana sighed and said, Idol Rabier is gone. Raphlia looked surprised and asked, really? Naruto put a hand on her shoulder and said, those things are not to be spoken about in public. Rafana blushed and said, "Yes, Shield Hero Sama." Naruto rubbed her head and said, "Naruto will do. Now let's finish up and get to the inn." He looked at the third person in the group and walked up to them. He asked, "And who would you be?" The boy bowed and replied, "My name is Fried, Shield Hero Sama." Naruto sighed and said, "Let's get this straight, all of you. Call me either Master for those of you who understand why, or Naruto for those of you who don't, otherwise Sir will work. I don't want to attract too much attention. We will be heading into Siltvelt. I want to see what type of people they are. Now that we're done, dinner and bed for all of us." The group headed to the inn and he purchased 3 rooms. He put Rino, Rafana, Keel and Fried in the first room. A clone, Philo, and Ryoko in the second and the rest in the third room. After setting rooms, the group went down and had dinner. They talked about training, but Naruto watched as Rafana and Raphtalia talked. Raphtalia seemed teary-eyed as the two talked. The pair hugged and continued to talk. Keel also joined in the conversation, but didn't seem to contribute as much. After dinner the younger members of the party seemed very tired, as was Raphtalia. Naruto has a clone carry each of the children to the first room and he carries Raphtalia to their room. The next morning the group gathered up everything and moved to cross the border. They were met by a group of Melrimar guards. The lead guard stopped them about 20 meters from the gatehouse. The lead guard exclaimed, "Halt! Where are you going?" Naruto got off of the cart and walked towards the guard and stopped 3 meters from the guard. He replied, "We're the Shield Hero and party. We're going to Siltvelt to do some trading and try to help your king with some diplomatic problems." The guard drew his sword and said, "The Shield Demon will not go to the Demon Kingdom to help them attack us. Surrender now and your death will be swift." Naruto smiled and shook his head. He then explained, "You understand that killing me right here on the border will have the Siltvelt nation roll over this garrison and slaughter all the humans in this area in revenge for my death, and then Shield Frieden will come later to follow up on said revenge? Also, I doubt you and your church-going followers understand that you will bring the fury of at least 2 nations down upon you, if not 3. Fabri would also attack for killing a hero. All of us are needed to stop the waves." The man raised his sword and shouted, "Shut up." Naruto shifted his shield to the Chimera shield and made some hand signs. Sylvie disappeared. Millie appeared on the roof of the cart and had made a few hand signs. The guard then said, "In the name of the kingdom of Melrimark, I am arresting the Shield Hero for treason." Naruto laughed and said, "You and what army? You have what, 10 men? I could beat that many when I was 12. I'm 16 now." The guard exclaimed, "Charge!" And the group of 10 advanced on Naruto and the cart. Naruto sighed and looked at the group. Most were level 10 with the leader being level 15. This was going to be a slaughter. Naruto quickly did several hand seals and put his hand on the ground. He then exclaimed, "Earth Technique, Swamp of the Underworld." The area in front of Naruto became mud and the guards sank to their chest. He then ended the jutsu. Naruto then walked up to the leader and reached down and pulled the necklace off of the man. Naruto sighed and explained to no one in particular, "Church of the 3 Heroes. Figures. Have fun digging yourselves out. Let's go, girls." Exp 100 appeared before Naruto. He chuckled lightly. The girls exclaimed, "All right." The cart rolled around the 10 stuck guards and through the open gate. Naruto jumped into the back of the cart as it passed by. He smiled and gave a salute to the stuck guards. On the other side of the gate, formerly angry Siltvelt guards were just looking at the scene in awe. The thought going through their minds was, the Shield Hero is really strong. The cart stopped on the other side of the gate and the Siltvelt guard looked at the rabbit woman looking at him in awe. She smiled and politely asked, "May we enter?" The man nodded dumbly. She smiled and said, "The Shield Hero and his party thank you. We respectfully thank you for allowing us into Siltvelt." The man's only reply was, "Uh-huh." Keel called back as they left, "You might want to close your mouths. Otherwise, you might catch some flies." Keel then fell back into the cart laughing heavily. The guards seemed to catch the joke and closed their mouths and regained some decorum. Naruto chuckled at Keel's joke. The town on the other side was only a little different. It just reversed the number of humans versus demi-humans. Naruto kept the shield up until the road became crowded with people who wanted to see the shield hero. Naruto waved and kindly asked for the people to part so that he could continue. The people gladly parted, but they also gave him a hero's welcome. He became a little self-conscious about all of this attention. Finally, a guard stopped the cart and asked them to see the mayor. Naruto and his party entered the mayor's mansion. They noticed the demi-human guards who seemed to stiffen at attention in the presence of Naruto. He sighed at this and the girls noticed this. The attaché welcomed them. "Hello, shield hero and party." He seemed to scowl at Raphtalia, but quickly schooled his features. Naruto noticed this, but the others didn't seem to notice. The dog man continued, "The mayor has prepared a banquet in your honor." Naruto smiled and bowed. He then replied, "I will thank him personally for this honor." The attaché nodded and said, "He will be honored in your presence." Naruto was tempted to roll his eyes. He hated the pomp of politics, but he smiled and he replied, "Please lead on." The man led them to a large room with a large table with a lot of food. Philo excitedly exclaimed, "Food." Naruto said authoritatively, "Philo, we need to wait for our host to offer a seat at the table and then we can then sit. He will then tell us the customs on when it is time to eat. There may be a prayer before eating or not. We mustn't upset our host." A loud laugh came from the head of the table. A lion-faced man was smiling and exclaimed, "Shield hero, you and your guests are welcome in my home. Please be seated. I would prefer you to sit by me so that we can converse more easily. As for the young one, she is free to eat, as soon as she sits down." Naruto chuckled as he made his way to the head of the table. He then said, "Thank you, but you may regret your decision with Philo. She has quite an appetite and is still learning table manners." The man offered the seat next to him and said, "My name is Lionx and as you have figured out, I am the mayor of the town bordering Melremark. I would also like to thank you for calming down the king and not sending us into war with them. I would not like for my town to be the center of the fighting. No matter what the feelings are on both sides of the border. My people also tell me that some of the guards on their side attempted to arrest you." Naruto sat down and chuckled. He replied, "A misunderstanding. Those guys are church zealots and not following the king's orders." Lionx nodded and said, "I see. I'm glad you were able to defuse the situation." Naruto nodded and changed his shield into his medical glove. He then grabbed a glass of water and took a sip. He then said, "In my world, fighting common and death is a way of life. I try to avoid it if possible." Lionx nodded and replied, "A good personal motto to have." Naruto took some fruit and put it on his plate. He put some of it in his mouth and chewed it. He looked around and saw the rest of his party eating, but watched the guards looking at Raphtalia. He then looked at the mayor and asked, "Is there a reason why your guards have a problem with my party members? Specifically, the Tanuki girl?" Lionx finished the gulp of wine he was drinking and set it down with a sigh. He then replied, "I must apologize for my men. There was a problem with a group of Tanuki some years ago who crossed the border into Melremark. After that they are on the edge of any Tanuki or raccoon demi-human. I personally don't bear any animosity towards them, but I can't say that for all my people. In the capital, there are those who will use your position for personal gain. Be on your guard. I would also say be on your guard with me too. I am a politician too." Naruto chuckled and replied, "Of course. I noticed 3 people in the rafters watching this meeting." Lionx's eyes went wide. He leaned towards Naruto and asked, "3? I only have 1. Naruto whispered as he pulled more fruit to his mouth, "Yours and the far side to listen to my party. The one in the middle is from Melremark. Not sure if they are from the Queen Ace." He popped the fruit into his mouth and said, "This fruit is delicious." He then pulled a leg from the bird on the tray on the table. He cut it and put it on his plate. He then whispered, "She is keeping an eye on both of us, but also Raphtalia, my Tanuki party member." Lionx then asked, "Would you like to see the armorer copy his shields?" Naruto looked at him in surprise and said, "That would be nice. I of course will compensate them for this." Lionx smiled and said, spoken like the true shield hero. Not taking advantage of others. From what I've heard, you've had some problems in other countries. Naruto sighed, but Sylvie spoke up, the first princess caused us no end of problems. As did the spear hero. The king saw the error and eventually corrected it. So, there isn't really a problem now. Other than her still walking around. The last part was a whisper. Lion X was laughing heartily. He then said, I shall make sure that the spear hero and the first princess shall not be allowed across the border. How about the other heroes? Naruto smiled and replied, they should be okay. How long a trip is it to the capital? Lion X smiled and replied, it should take you a few days to a week by cart. 3 if you have a fast Philolio. Philo raised her hand and exclaimed, I'm very fast. Lion X looked surprised and asked, what does she mean? Naruto replied, she is a Philolio queen, thus the reason she has the human-like form. He turned and said sternly, no transformations in the dinner hall. Philo. Philo looked depressed and exclaimed, oh. Lion X looked at Ryoko and asked, so what is she? Naruto chuckled and replied, a dragon queen. Lion X exclaimed, what? Naruto smiled and said, no need to get excited. I think it has to do with them being raised by me, a hero. The magic of the shield. If one of the other heroes raised a Philolial or a dragon, they might become a queen or king. Lion X rubbed his chin and said, they are not queens. They ain't. The current Philolial queen has helped us with a wave we had about a month ago. We had vassal weapon holders help us before that. We know that she is going around home about once a month as far as I can figure around the countries that have a dragon at the hourglass as soon. Lion X replied, you have a week or so before the next wave will hit an area. Either it will be an area where you will be or not. You can't be everywhere at once. It will also run new ragged. Our king has sent for adventurers to join your party. You should choose very carefully. Some will help. Some will not. I want you to succeed. I also want my people to prosper. I don't have many problems with humans, but do understand that slavery is legal here and humans are the largest portion of the slaves we have here. Not a problem with this. Nadak said, thank the information and best wishes. Most of my party are slaves. The only ones who earn are the young ones. I own one human and the other demi-human. Do you have? Lion X laughed and replied, from what I can see. You treat your slaves well and I would guess most are either mid-teen or younger, but have grown in levels. I commend you for their growth. He also nudged Naruto and said, I also see that some have devotion beyond a good slaveholder. The type that is tantamount to love, I would say. Naruto sighed and adjusted his plate. The rest of the afternoon was filled with aimless chatter and food. Thus, we may know that there are 5 essentials for victory. 1. He will win who knows when to fight and when not to fight. 2. He will win who knows how to handle both superior and inferior forces. 3. He will win whose army is animated by the same spirit throughout all its ranks. 4. He will win who, prepared himself, waits to take the enemy unprepared. 5. He will win who has military capacity and is not interfered with by the sovereign. That evening there was a festival to celebrate Naruto being in the city. There was much to drink and merriment. The group went to bed, but Naruto kept watch over them that night. Queen Mirelia Melremark was dressed in her room in the capital of Fabre. There were 2 people in robes outside her window. She didn't appear to be disturbed by their presence. She asked, so, Shield Hero, where do we stand? The larger of the 2 replied, I am not the actual or a shadow clone, as I explained to before. There has been something that has changed me. I am a person that bleeds and am an actual person. My name is Menma and I am your connection to my brother. Mirelia smiled and said, my, that is interesting. How do we proceed? Menma replied, I will work with your shadows, but I would still have some of your shadows keep an eye on the other heroes. They are in danger. A serious look came across the queen and she replied, I agree. How do you communicate with your brother? Menma replied, we have a couple means of communication. A scroll that takes an hour or more to communicate, or I make a clone and disperse it. He will know within moments. This one is for emergencies only. Since he might be in a fight and the knowledge could disturb him in a fight. The queen nodded and said, I would like to have you take my daughter with you to have her be in his party to learn from him. Menma's eyes squinted in suspicion and asked, for what reason? She is the crown princess. Correct? The queen smiled and replied, she is, but I want her to learn about the shield hero and have her work with the other heroes. Menma scowled and explained, I've been on teams since brother was 12. Some work and some are doomed to failure. The team he is leading are a well-oiled machine. He noticed a blue-haired girl enter the room, but continued, the spear hero does not understand that there is no I in team. He leads his team by attacking the monsters and leaving scraps to his party members. His personal feelings are that he is protecting them. The bow hero doesn't lead. He just orders and hopes that things will go his way. He forces the situation and uses the power of the bow to make sure that they win. He has lost a couple of adventurers this way. He also has a vigilante streak. The sword hero is a loner and forces his party to keep up with him. He is strong, but will leave those behind that can't keep up or might have hit a plateau in skill. The blue-haired girl asked, what about the shield hero? Menma chuckled, and replied, I would be partially bragging, but here goes. The girl looked confused and asked, what do you mean? The queen nodded and both figures disappeared from the legend into the room. Menma pulled back his cowl to reveal his face. The girl gasped. Menma chuckled and said, do I frighten you? The girl became stoic and exclaimed, no. Not at all. The queen laughed lightly. Menma chuckled and apologized, I'm sorry. It's just that my appearance can be startling to some. He bowed and said, I am the brother of the shield hero, Men Uzumaki. The girl gave a curtsy. She then said, I am Melty Q Melremark. Now you were explaining about your brother. Menma smiled and continued, yes, Naruto Uzumaki, the shield hero. He is training his team to work together to be stronger as a group and as individuals. While at lower levels, they can take on monsters of higher level. To prove my point, Naruto had a duel with the spear hero. Naruto's level was in the 20s while Motoyasu's was in the 40s. Naruto easily defeated him. Even with interference from your older sister. Also, understand that my brother has had to deal with discrimination from your country, which your mother had strictly forbidden, but your sister, father and the church ignored. This caused many problems for him. He has some trust issues, but that can be overcome by working with him. I would advise not taking a noble attitude around him. It would annoy him. Melty raised an eyebrow and asked, why? Menma smiled widely and showed his enlarged canines. He explained, he thinks that nobles are mostly pompous fools. At least mostly. He chuckled lightly. Melty looked offended and said, a noble's job is to serve the people. Menma laughed and exclaimed, you would think that, but not all nobles would agree. Some feel that the people should serve the nobles. There are also other reasons, but you will have to earn his trust to learn them. He is an excellent fighter even though he uses the shield, but also a combat medic. He is open to learning new things, but is easy to anger if others are doing wrong to others. He will watch and will jump in. Melty asked, why won't he just jump right in? The queen replied, you must understand the situation first before you act. You might be interrupting a ritual, or a baptism and not understand. There are people who change from water to air that need what would appear to be cruel treatment, but this is needed for their lungs to develop. Your interference would condemn that child to a premature death. You think that you are doing right, but you're not. Menma chuckled and said, it can be even more subtle than that. A person abused for a long time is lashing out at their abuser. This can look like a harsh attack, but it is the final straw that broke their back and they can't take it anymore. It can even result in death, but you must watch and see what the motive is. You can also be fooled. This is why you don't just jump in. Also, you jumping in could cause a war. Melty smiled and exclaimed, I'm happy that you were able to explain this to me. Menma rubbed her head affectionately, which caused her to scowl. Menma chuckled and said, my brother has a lot to learn and will teach you a lot. You will also have to do things that you may not want to do to become the stronger. Melty raised an eyebrow and asked, such as? Menma chuckled and whispered into the queen's ear. The queen looked back at Melty and put her fan over her lower face. She then said, "Oh my. While I might be offended, since you explained it, I agree, but he will have to get her to agree." Melty looked curiously at the two and asked, "What? What will I have to agree to?" Menma chuckled and replied, "That is for Naruto to explain." Melty crossed her arms and a pout crossed her face. Menma began to laugh heartily. The queen then explained, "You will be going with my shadow and Menma to talk to your father. Afterwards, you will meet up with Naruto and his party. You are to accompany him for a little while to learn about him and his being an adventurer." Melty became happy and replied, "Yes, mother." Menma said, "Somebody is trying to impress someone." Melty asked in an annoyed tone, "Did you say something?" Menma smiled and replied, "I just call them as I see them." The female shadow bowed and then said, "I dare say that we shall head out in the morning and head to Melremark. So, be ready, my lady." Both Menma and the shadow disappeared. Melty looked at where they stood in awe. Break Naruto watched the panther girl closely as she slashed the salamander, but seemed to leave an opening behind herself. Naruto closed behind her and said, "Nala, you're leaving your back open to attack. Make sure you let your team members know about where you're going." He blocked a porcupine that attempted to exploit this opening, but he blocked this. Nala turned to see this block and blushed at the slip-up. She exclaimed, "I'm sorry, Shield Hero." Naruto sighed, as Raphlia moved behind Nala to take out a different salamander that had taken the place of the one that Nala had slain. Millie cast a spell, "As source of my power I order thee, decipher the laws of nature's wet fireball." The salamander crumbled under the spell. Nala commented, "Your team works well and seems to be able to cover for deficiencies of others that have been added to the party." She was looking at the younger party members. The trio of younger party members were in the middle of a group of monsters, but had Sylvie and Reno standing behind them giving orders. They followed them without question and executed them with some precision. Naruto nodded and replied, "They had a good teacher while in the area of Sietst." Nala raised an eyebrow and said, "I thought that that area had been destroyed." Naruto replied while blocking some beetles, "No, just hit hard by the wave and some rogue soldiers." Nala growled and exclaimed, "Melremark should be punished for that." Naruto raised his eyebrow and said, "The country will not, but we might have a chance to find and punish the soldiers that participated in the incident." He then exclaimed, "After we clean up, we need to add chakra to all new recruits." He turned to Nala and asked, "So are you going to be a permanent addition to my party?" Nala drove her sword into the last beetle and smiled at Naruto. She then said, "I would love to be a disciple of the great shield hero." Having cleared the group of monsters, Naruto looked upon the new monsters and fed them to his shield. He found a couple new shields, a salamander and a beetle shield. He switched to the salamander and helped with the cleanup. They also cleaned the edible monsters and fed what wasn't edible or sellable to the shield. Naruto when they finished loading the cart, Naruto looked into the help menu and found a loot drop setting. It had been set to put into the shield. He sighed and grumbled, "Those would have been nice to be able to sell." Sylvie asked, "What would have been nice to sell?" Naruto put his shield in front of himself and said, "The shield has been holding out on us. We've been getting loot drops, but they've been going into the shield." Millie pouted and said, "We've gotten stuff and it's been holding out on us?" Naruto chuckled and replied, "Looks like it to me. Let's see." Suddenly several swords and gems fell from the shield into the main area of the cart. He then explained, "The gems will be good components for making jewelry. So, we should save them. The swords will be extra if ours get worn. They give a slight bonus for attack and damage bonus, but nothing more. Better than an iron sword, but not much better." He then said, "All right, time for medical treatments and then head out." Everyone nodded and then tended to the wounds. About 10 minutes later they were on the road again. Naruto began to explain chakra to Nala and the children. Chakra is another energy in your body. It is the merging of the mind and spirit. Mana is different. If your chakra is depleted to 0 you will die. So, don't do it. Chakra exhaustion is no joke. If you are running low don't use it. Use magic or fall back. Call me, call someone else, just don't use the last of your chakra. I can help recharge it, but it won't be efficient and it will cause you to take longer to recover. Chakra will recover normally. It depends on each individual. Because of what and who I am, I can recover more chakra than the whole party has in a few hours. There are 5 basic types of chakra: fire, water, earth, lightning, and air. There are advanced chakras, like wood, ice and others, but we will not get into them until they manifest. Myself, I have all but earth, but I can force earth jutsu. It takes a lot of chakra to do those jutsu, but it is possible. Even if you lack a chakra type you can eventually do it, but the cost is enormous. I would advise working on your types first, one at a time, and mastering them first and then moving to others if your pool will allow it. Sylvie has the next largest pool other than Jiraiya-sensei. I will tell you now. Control exercises will be boring and will be the first thing you will be doing, but they are important. Keel asked, have Philo and Ryoko gotten their chakra released yet? Naruto frowned and shook his head. He then replied, no, I haven't done that just yet. I want to do that when we reach the hourglass in the capital. The reason for that, it will take a few days for their chakra to settle and then to start training. We have to be in a spot to train and defend those who are training. While I can defend the team for the most part by myself, we need Philo to pull the cart. It will look funny for me to pull the cart. Don't you think? The kids began to laugh at the thought of Naruto pulling the cart and Philo pouted thinking of him pulling off the cart. Philo called out in a pouting voice, you wouldn't take away pulling the cart from me, would you, master? Naruto chuckled and said, no, Philo. I wouldn't. While I'm strong enough to pull the cart, I wouldn't do that unless it was necessary. Philo perked up and said, thank you, master. They continued until they made camp and had a quiet night. They broke camp and made good time to the capital the next day. Philo exclaimed, wow. The guards knelt when they saw Naruto, and Naruto bowed at the waist to the guards as he passed them. Naruto just got a notification that Jiraiya wanted to class up. Naruto allowed it. He looked at the levels and his main party members were all 40 with stars next to them. The kids were now 20 and Philo and Ryoko were 17. Nala was 30. Naruto was now 38. The fights on the road had pushed them up in level. He was happy to get them to the capital and wanted them to be able to class up. He then saw a woman dressed in priestly robes walk up to the cart and say, Shield Hero, Uzumaki. We are ready for your party. If you are ready, if you will follow me, we can assist in upgrading your party and attaching your shield to our country. Naruto nodded and waved for Ryoko to land. Ryoko landed and she hopped into the cart while transforming. Raphleia walked beside the cart. She caught some glares from some of the populace, but no one seemed to do anything. They followed the priestess to a church and parked the cart outside the church. Philo transformed and changed. The whole party then followed the priestess into the church. When the doors closed, Naruto then said, I thank you for not making a scene. The woman bowed and said, it was brought to our attention by the Duke that you want to be treated as a mere mortal. Thus, we will treat you as such. You are to be praised, but I understand that making a spectacle will interfere with becoming the savior that we need. Now let's register you with the hourglass. They moved deeper into the church and the hourglass glowed. It sent a beam into the shield. Naruto saw a second hourglass appear on his HUD. He saw that it had about 5 days until it would reach 0. He turned to the priestess and exclaimed, we have about 5 days until a wave hits Siltvelt. Tell your king and have him get anyone and everyone ready for an attack. I have no idea where it will be in your kingdom, but it will come. The priestess bowed and replied, thank you for this information. You will excuse me while I forward this information. Afterwards we will talk. She hurriedly left the room. Naruto looked at the other attendant and asked, so how do we class up? The attendant bowed his head and replied, Shield Hero-sama. Those who are going to class up go to the hourglass and touch it. They then are given the choice to class up. Naruto nodded to the girls. Sylvie, Raphleia, Millie, and Rino all moved up to the hourglass and touched it. Naruto got a notification and accepted it. All of them glowed and the stars beside their names disappeared. Only Millie seemed to be happy. Naruto asked, "What is wrong?" The attendant spoke up and said, "It is possible that the paths offered were not acceptable to them." Three of the girls nodded and Sylvie explained, "The choices offered didn't seem right or weren't right. I'm sorry, Naruto-koi." Naruto took Sylvie, Raphlia, and Rino into a hug and looked at Millie and asked, "Did you get what you wanted?" She smiled sadly and said, "Yes, I'm sorry you guys didn't get what you wanted." The girls looked back at Millie and Raphlia replied, "That's great that one of us got what we wanted." Millie entered the hug, Philo and Ryoko entered the hug just to be part of it. Naruto smiled and looked at the slowly aging members of his party and said, "Hey, group hug." And the other members joined in. He then chuckled and said, "Anyone can join." The attendant blushed and joined in. The priestess had just entered and joined the hug too. Naruto laughed heartily and said, "Now that is like it." After a few minutes the group broke apart with everyone feeling good. The priestess then explained, "The king has said that he wants you to take as many of his troops along with you to the next wave as possible. The church will also send healers along to help with healing." Naruto nodded and then said, "This is more like it. I will meet with the king in a little while to discuss basic strategy. We shall take some of the next few days to gather some adventurers also to help." The priestess nodded and left the room. Naruto then said to the group, "It is time to get the others ready for basic chakra training. We will work on starting chakra, control and substitution. The other parts will be done after the wave. I will be the main trainer. We will not work on elemental training. It will take too long and we don't have time. We will also work on magic and martial training. Reinforcing with chakra is not a thing for the newbies yet. Now we will secure lodging and then talk to the king." The group formed behind Naruto and followed behind him. They quickly found an inn and got a few rooms. The priestess led them to the castle and to the king's audience chambers. He sees a large man with white tiger features sitting on a throne with a woman sitting next to him with similar features. Naruto smirks when a small girl no older than 5 or 6 with similar features runs into the chambers and into Naruto. The girl falls down and starts to bleed from the nose. She staggers to her feet and exclaims, "Who attacks the daughter of the king of Siltvelt?" Naruto chuckles, as he sees fear come across the faces of the king and queen. Naruto kneels down to eye level and exclaims, "You should really watch where you're going. You might someday run into the shield hero." The girl, not seeing the shield on his arm, declares, "It was you. You hit me." Guards arrest him. Naruto raised his shield and changed it into his medical glove. It glowed green and he then said, "A slight broken nose and deviated septum. No real problem fixing. Entitled attitude. That, I might not be able to fix. Now hold still while I heal your nose. So, you don't bleed all over your fur and the floor." The Giri complied as Naruto held his glowing hand over her nose. She asked after he finished, "Who are you? I don't recognize you as any of our healers and you're human." Naruto stood and bowed. He then transformed his glove back into his Chimera Viper shield and replied, "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, the shield hero. At your service." The girl blushed under her fur and bowed on the floor. She then exclaimed, "Please forgive me, great god shield hero." The king and queen let out a sigh of relief when Naruto patted the girl's head and said, "You don't need to bow to me, but be more careful next time and be nicer to those around you. You may be royalty, but that doesn't mean that you are to be respected just because you are the princess. You need to earn their respect. Deeds will earn more respect than throwing around your title. That will only earn you more problems and anger from others." The king then spoke up. He speaks wise words, "Sasha. Thank you for going easy on our daughter shield hero." Naruto then said, "Naruto." The queen looked at him questioningly and asked, "What, shield hero?" Naruto replied, "My name is Naruto and I prefer to be referred to as such. I came to discuss the next wave and how we are going to deal with this. And before you tell me that I will lead your army to glory, we can stop right here. I don't know how to lead a large group, yet. I want advisors to help. People who have experience to help me. I don't know the strengths and weaknesses of your men and women. Your weapons and magics. You have strategies and so do I. I want to make them work together effectively. The king nodded and said, wise words. I will call up the generals and his sub-commanders. How many can you call up to the wave? Naruto accessed the help screen and then replied, I can summon about 300 to the wave location at my level. When I pass level 40, I can do 400. That includes supply carts for those troops. Maybe more, we will have to see when we assemble. The king nodded and then said, we need to figure out the composition of those troops. Naruto then said, we have 5 days. I would like for you to assemble your generals and about 50 of your strongest adventurers. We will then figure out what will work. We also need one of our group to be a flyer to be able to come back to the castle and get reinforcements sent as soon as possible. I will first explain how I did things in my first wave. The king nodded and Naruto continued, we secured the besieged town. The other heroes attacked the main monster. While this may take longer, I would say it will save on civilian casualties. The king took a thinking pose and replied, I agree. It also gives us a secure base to attack the main monster and bring the wounded while keeping the civilians safe. I see little reason for changing it. The generals might not agree, but you will have to debate with them and more than likely they will not be there and their captains will. Making you and the captains the ranking officers there. If any of the vassal heroes come, they can also help Vittoria, the queen of Philolials. The Dragon King has kept quiet for the time being, but your Dragon Giri might draw his attention. So, watch yourself. Naruto nodded and said, I will watch for this king and queen. I don't want my girls to be in any trouble. I say we meet up tomorrow if you can assemble the people tomorrow and we discuss basic tactics. The king nodded agreement and said, I agree and would like to have you for dinner tonight. Naruto chuckled and said, I hope I'm not on the menu. The king laughed and replied, I would never attempt to have a cook try to cook a god. Also, I think you would fight against it and it would make you not really want to help my nation. He then winked at Naruto and began to laugh with Naruto. The daughter and wife looked at each other in confusion. After the banquet, Naruto was in the room with Nala and the children, including Philo and Ryoko. Fried was blushing up a storm and Nala continued to say, what is your problem? You will see a woman without a shirt eventually. Nala wore pants, but went bare-chested. She was offered a towel, but refused. Naruto sighed and had Rino cover Philo and Ryoko's chest and crotch with a towel. He noticed that Kyo wore a chest wrap and had his answer. Rafana had pulled her shirt to just below her breasts. Naruto then explained, you remember my explanation about chakra earlier? They all nodded and he continued, I will be. Shall we say kickstarting your chakra? Nala, I'm going to have to watch you very carefully, since you're about 16 or 17 in human years. Which is about the cut-off for this procedure. It could hurt you badly. It might hurt or feel really good, but concentrate on staying stilly. Naruto started with Philo and worked his way down the line. Until he hit Nala. He expected this one to be like Sylvie and Millie. He wasn't disappointed. When Naruto inserted the chakra, Nala arched her back and moaned in pleasure. Naruto sighed, and knew he was in trouble in a way he was with Sylvie and Millie. When Nala caught her breath, she reached up and captured his lips, not thinking. Naruto, also not thinking, tried to gently push her away, put his hand on her breast and she deepened the kiss. Nala then passed out. Sylvie smiled and just shook her head as Naruto laid the girl down. Fried looked at the hero and asked, how can I get girls like you? Naruto shrugged his shoulders and replied, to tell you the truth, I really don't know. If it is living my life. I don't think you want it. My life has been bad in the beginning, and is balancing out in other ways. So, if you want a crap childhood, then. Fried shook his head and said, my life has been bad enough. It should get better later. Naruto nodded and said, it's probably not a good idea to think about it. Fried sat up and became dizzy. Rino grabbed him and led him to his bed and tucked him in. She then kissed him on the cheek and said, you did good. You may not be the hero, but I'm sure that you can find a Giri. He smiled and closed his eyes. Naruto and the rest put the rest to bed. Naruto watched as Sylvie pulled down Nala's pants and he raised an eyebrow. Sylvie replied, "You did this to me and Millie. A change is in order. You can watch, help or get out of the way. I'm thinking that she is going to be added to the harem, whether we want it or not. You don't mind a hairy body, do you?" she asked with a wink. Naruto had noticed that Nala had fine hair all over her body and her face was more panther-like than human-like than most demi-humans. When she grabbed his face her hand felt nice and he didn't mind the feeling of the fur. So, he shook his head and said, "No, I find her attractive and the fur doesn't bother me." Sylvie blushed and said, "Figures. He does enjoy squeezing my tail." She had finished with Nala and put her in her bed. She jumped and yelped. He whispered into her ear, "But you do like it when I touch it." He was massaging her tail. She was blushing and leaning her head back into him with a moan. Rino chuckled and grabbed his ass and said, "I would like some attention too." Naruto turned and kissed her deeply. This continued for several minutes. The trio finally broke it up and left the room. Rino then said after leaving the room, "You have until we finish the waves and after that, I'm taking you out for a spin. I know the rest of the girls are going to also. I know you have the stamina for it. So, keep training, stud." She kissed him on the lips and went to her room. Sylvie took his hand and said, "Have I told you how much I appreciate that you came to our world? If I haven't, I would offer my body as an offering, but Jiraiya-sensei would be mad. You saved Raphleia-chan and I now the others. You are an actual hero not just because the shield selected you, but because you are you. I have fallen in love with you. Even if we fight over little things later on, I will love you. It is not because I owe you. It is because we are learning to complete ourselves and each other. Even if we go away from you or I go away we will be whole. Not yet, but we will be. It is not that we complete each other, it is that we complement each other. You will be whole and we will be whole people. We are teaching each other how to become whole people. If we lose someone it will hurt, but we will be able to move on." Naruto looked at her and wasn't sure what to think. He asked, "What are you talking about? We don't know what the future may hold. We of course will try to make sure that none of us will die, but it may happen, but we can't truly prevent that," Sylvie replied. Naruto squeezed her hand and nodded. He then said, "You're some rabbit. Horny 1 minute. Sprouting philosophy, the next. I think I love you." She smiled and giggled. She then said, "Got to keep Konoha's #1 knuckle-headed ninja on his toes." The pair entered their room and found Raphleia asleep. The pair readied for bed and went to sleep. Naruto was surprised. Raphleia was laying on top of him this time. He was quite surprised that she was naked though, as was he. He knew nothing had happened since her body position was lower than what it was for them to have had sex. He nibbled on her ear. This elicited a quiet moan. Naruto then whispered into her ear, "Do not react. We are both naked. Slowly get up and get dressed. I think that one of the other girls is playing a prank on you, me or both of us." He felt her nod and she sat up. She got up and blushed at the sight of him, but quickly got dressed. He sighed and noticed that Millie was in the bed with Sylvie and him. Sylvie was still in the night clothes that they had gone to bed in, but Millie was naked. Naruto rolled gently onto Sylvie, who woke quickly and asked quietly, "Are we breaking the rules?" Naruto replied quietly, "No, Millie played a prank on Raphleia and I. We woke up naked this morning. It could have been both disastrous and fun." Sylvie nodded and said, "Well, go get dressed before her prank gets the rabbit involved. Please." Naruto nodded and stood up noticing he was nearly ready to take Sylvie. He got dressed quickly and then hid Millie's clothes. Other than her panties and bra. Sylvie giggled lightly at this. She knew better than to prank her mate. The fox girl spent half the morning running around looking for her clothes. Naruto reminded her about sealing and she found them in a seal on her pack. With that crisis averted, Naruto had Rino, Nala, and Millie take the children to the town while Naruto, Raphleia and Sylvie met at the castle. Naruto found the priestess, a couple armored knights, one male one female, about 5 grizzled-looking adventurers and one person with a pike. He noticed something special about the pike, but set that aside. Naruto walked into the room with the Chimera Viper shield equipped. He nodded to the two knights, who both nodded back and took a place at the table in the middle of the room. The rest of the group moved around the table. The woman knight began, "I am General Chimera. This is General Hans. You of course know Priestess Vanya. The man with the pike is vassal hero, Sherman. We have 5 adventurers representing the adventurer group to save space and eliminate confusion. They will lead that group. Sheila, Johansson, Vass, Yos, and Esper. Everyone, this is the shield hero, Naruto Uzumaki, and part of his team Sylvie and Raphlia. We are here to go over. What is the Tanuki doing here?" a male of the adventurers asked angrily. Naruto looked the man in the eye and replied, "She is part of my party. Do you have a problem with that?" The man looked at Naruto for a minute, but was jabbed in the ribs by the woman next to him and shook his head. He replied, "I guess not." Naruto said, "Good. She is an integral part of my team. Now let's get down to business. General Chimera, I can bring around 400 people with me. I figure we will need a medical team, a scout team, a vanguard team, clearing team, a reserve team and a fire team. Can you think of any others we might need?" Chimera took a thinking pose and then said, "Medical is usually an afterthought. Why include it?" Naruto replied, "We do not know how far away the wave will appear. It might take hours for the relief to arrive, so having them on scene will help us with having at least somewhat fresh troops, or at least healed troops. Also, my healing can only go so far." General Hans chimed in, "I agree with his thinking. While this will cause us to have less initial forces, it will allow us to have more forces over time. Vanya, how many combat priests do you have?" Vanya thought for a minute and then replied, "About 20 that are trained and 5 that are in training. We have about 100 healing priests. We can send about 30 with you. Just keep them safe." Naruto then said, "We then will establish a med station with the healing priests. Station the trainees and 1 full combat medic for each trainee. The other healers will stay at the med station on shifts to heal those injured. The reserve will act as their guard for the initial and we will rotate who guards them." An older woman laughed and said, "Yos is the name. I like your idea. We can also assign some of the adventurers to rear guard too. They may not like it, but it will help keep our supplies safe." The youngest woman raised her hand and was acknowledged. She asked, "How will we determine who is in this scouting unit?" Naruto replied, "Good question. My opinion is, it depends on the terrain, the skills available and what type of civilian area we have to evacuate. The civilians need to be removed from the area first. I want to do as little damage to the towns of this country as possible, but we may have to use area magic to eliminate large groups of enemies. I want to not have collateral damage. Buildings can be rebuilt, but lives can't. I also don't want to waste the lives of our men. If an offensive is not going to help, then we should not do it. I would rather pull back, surround and destroy an enemy than waste troops on a useless attack. I know that we need to take out the main monster, but it took the other heroes 3 hours to eliminate a chimera. I think we can do better with better tactics and not have to lose people in the meantime." The man from before spoke up, "You're idealist, child." Naruto laughed and replied, "I'm from a world of shinobi. We've been at war for over 100 years. If I could use a weapon other than the shield I would be of more use, but hey, I have other uses." He began to laugh. Sylvia then explained, "He has other means of attack than magic. He has what his world calls jutsu." Naruto raised his hand and a blue sphere appeared in his hand. Sylvie continued, "If this were to hit you, it would not only send you flying backyards, but it would also damage your internal organs. You more than likely would die from it. This is a non-elemental jutsu. There are 5 elements, fire, water, earth, lightning, and air. Each has several jutsu within their realm. So, he is not just a defender. He is also more than likely the second best healer we have next to the priestess Vanya. She can revive, while he can't. Also, he could probably heal more than the priestess. He just has more reserves. No offense, priestess." Priestess blushed and replied, "None taken. Van, you do like to cause trouble." Van laughed and replied, You may be right. Hans sighed and said, so we have the basic plan. Naruto explained, I need you guys to set up the groups so that they total 400. Have them meet in the square early in the morning 4 days from now. Have all the supply carts also assembled. If we have them all tallied so I can transport them with me. I would also like for you to have one person that can fly back to the castle to tell them where to send the relief troops. Breakman looked at the Queen and Melty. He then said, we need to head out now. The Queen nodded and Menma knelt down. Melty looked confused, but the shadow explained, you need to get on his back, so that we can enter Siltveld quickly. Melty asked, why? Menma replied, there will be a wave in Siltveld in 4 days. We should make it there in time.